Hey everybody, Steve the Adventure Historian. I was just about to say I'm trying to get to the intersection of 2nd and Madison, but I'm realizing it's literally right in front of me here. So that makes life a little bit easier. I thought I'd have another block or two to do my intro, but apparently that time has come and gone. I foolishly waited, but I'm here now. This here is 2nd and Southwest 2nd and Madison, directly behind me. We're more towards the kind of southern part of downtown where it's actually nice because there's usually fewer people around and a lot less noise. But anyway, directly behind me here, this is the northeast corner of said intersection. This guy in his truck almost rammed into my selfie stick. That's how close he was to the curb. This is a 2nd and Madison Dental, but I'm sure there's more stuff up there. But there's, you know, a much newer building here today than would have been here back in 1912, you know, just 109 years ago. Another bus. Just when I was saying it's so quiet around here, and then just like a bunch of cars and 2 buses showed up. Anyway, the northeast corner of 2nd and Madison here, this was once the site of the Hotel Lindquist, or the Lindquist Hotel, however you want to shake it. And that was the site of this fresh episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So just imagine looking over your shoulder, and there's a rustic old hotel here, not this kind of ugly modern piece of crap they got here now. So it's the start of 1912, it's January, more specifically it's January 18th, 1912. And a woman named Rose Orme, I'm assuming that's how her name was spelled, it was spelled O-R-M-E. I've been going with Orme. It just sounds right to me. She had been split from her husband, a guy named Claude Whitsitt. Wait, hold on. Yes, I was right. She'd been split from her husband, who was named Claude. Hell yeah, brother. She'd been split for a year from her husband named Claude Whitsitt. And on this particular evening, Rose was home at the Hotel Lindquist when he showed up out of nowhere. Now, they've been separated for about a year again, so I can only assume that this is probably just one of several efforts on his part to try to get his wife back. And considering the circumstances and considering the time, hell yeah, brother, something tells me this wasn't so much about this guy realizing he'd done something wrong and really wanting the love of his life back. I think this was just another guy who couldn't accept the fact that his wife didn't want to be with him, and, you know, I'm a man, you don't say no to me. Because more often than not, that's usually the case. So, Claude, as I'll affectionately refer to him, shows up at the hotel January 18th, 1912, and knocks on the door, comes in, and not asks, but pretty much demands that Rose come back to him, quit trying to be independent. He asked her specifically to quit her job where she was working at the Yale, the newspaper said she was working at the Yale, I think it's the Yale Union Laundry Building. I've heard it just called like the Yale Building, the Yale Laundry Building. And that is located over around, I think it's like 11th and Morrison or 10th and Morrison. And that building, which of course was a laundry facility once upon a time, that building was the scene used for like the big climactic fight in the first Twilight movie. You actually see Kristen Stewart's character walk up to the building, and that was, you know, it actually functioned, I think, as kind of like a dance, a place to go, like a dance, I don't know what you call it, but a place you go to dance. They lay the hardwood floor down, which is interesting because I think her mom in that movie, that's what she did. So the building there was very apropos for that movie, considering that. But a long time ago, it was a laundry facility. And Rose Orme worked there. And that pissed Claude off. He wanted her to quit this job, come home and be a nice, dutiful housewife for him. And she refused. And after, you can only say no so many times, she stepped away from him and went and sat at a desk up in her room. She'd been writing a letter to a friend before Claude showed up. And Claude, this is so the way that this went down. Like, she went and sat down on a seat, so she's kind of down from him because he's standing. He walked up behind her, pointed the gun straight down into her head that he was carrying with him, and shot her straight down through the head. For wanting to be an independent woman and not wanting to go back to his worthless ass. So there was a guy by the name of W.P. Morrison who it was just described as he was in the building at that time. I don't know if he was the proprietor, like he ran the hotel, or if he just happened to be a tenant there. But whatever the case, he was there and he was in close proximity to the room when this happened. And he actually I think he knew Rose Orme personally and knew of Claude. And he said even that Claude had shown up like 2 weeks previous and tried to it's described as he tried to get into her room, which leads me to believe like she wasn't home and he probably knew that and he was trying to sneak in there to do God knows what. And, so he was removed from the building and he left the hotel, went and found the closest, police officer walking a beat, which is interesting because, like, the Portland police are, like, right around the corner from here now. So, yeah, you'll probably periodically see police vehicles in the background. He went and got himself a police officer and brought him back. It was like, I have an officer with me now and I'm married to Rose Orme and I want to get into her room. And, of course, it was clarified that they'd been split for a very long time, and once again he was removed from this area. The officer he probably grabbed to come help him probably was instrumental in officially removing him from the hotel altogether. So yeah, as I figured earlier, and it didn't take a genius to figure out, this guy had probably had multiple efforts put into place to try to get his wife back. It comes off as almost an obsession to me. And here's the thing is, when they initially separated, Rose had actually settled in Grants Pass, Oregon, which is like probably a little less than 300 miles south of Portland. It's getting down closer to the Oregon-California border. It's kind of on your way to Medford. Just one of those towns kind of along the freeway. And that's where Rose Orme had settled after their split. And she couldn't get comfortable there because Claude kept coming and trying, probably more demanding. She come back with him, and eventually she ended up leaving Grants Pass and found herself up here in Portland in just, another effort to try to get away from this guy that just would not take the hint, would not leave her alone. And what's of particular further interest, because Rose Orme's family, much of which was in Grants Pass, which is probably why she was down there, stated that they never were really ever together. So I don't know if that's just their family trying to save face with her and act like this guy was just a lunatic from day one. Maybe they're right. But could it have been that they maybe weren't actually in like a real relationship that she broke off, but maybe it was like they dated once or twice and Claude became convinced that what they had was much more than what she thought. And when it got a little too serious for him, but hadn't for her, that was when she broke it off. So it is a little bit mysterious exactly how serious things had gotten with them. But clearly they hadn't gotten serious enough for this guy to be this invested in trying to get her back like this was his wife. And even then, if your wife says she doesn't want to be with you anymore, that sucks. But that's not your decision to undo. If they decide they want to move on with your life, you have to accept that. I don't care if it's now or if it's 109 years ago. I know people thought differently back then, but sorry. That's just how it is. If someone doesn't want to be with you, you need to accept that. You do not have the right to exact violence on them, much less kill them. So, in a story that was very much reported as like a relationship gone awry, that led to this obsession on Claude Whitsitt's part and this tragedy that followed. If Rose Orme's family was being honest and saying they never really were totally together, this story's really more just the story of a messed up, twisted young guy that just didn't, he couldn't take no for an answer, I guess is how you'd put it. And after he shot Rose Orme, you know, so, I don't know, there's just something really disturbing about her sitting down and him coming up behind her and just sticking the gun to her head and shooting her that way. And after doing so, he put that gun to his own head and shot himself dead. So again, was that the coup de grace of a guy who had become just obsessed to a beyond twisted nature, and a woman that just didn't want to be with him? I went through this once with a girl. For like 15 months, this girl tried to get me to be with her, and no matter how harshly I said no, she kept trying to find new methods. Now, she didn't break down my doors and demand to see me. She didn't show up with a gun or anything, so I hardly was experiencing what Rose Orme was, but it's true. It's this thing in people. It was true then, and it's true now. People, you know, there's a multitude of different possibilities that can lead people to behave in such a manner. Sometimes it's, you know, mental problems. Sometimes it's just this break with reality. It's a lot of things that can lead people to do crazy things like this. Hello, bus. And there are some further strange oddities as to how exactly the events at the hotel here actually transpired. For instance, there was absolute mystery as to how Claude had managed to get into her place, because the attitude was like, you know, Rose Orme's been dealing with this for a year, and she was, you know, kind of genuinely scared of this guy. So, in fact, she was scared so much that she'd asked others in the hotel to kind of keep a watchful eye out for her in case this guy, because he'd already come around in the past. People, you know, this Morrison guy knew exactly who he was, specifically because he would show up and, you know, claim he was Rose's husband and all this stuff. And so people were keeping a watchful eye on the building, monitoring if this guy ever showed up. She kept her door locked. She didn't want this guy around, so it wasn't like if he came to her door, she was just going to willingly let him in. No matter what he had to say, she didn't want to hear it. So there was no signs of forced entry. You didn't kick or break the door down. So, like, did she give in and let him in? Like, it's a little mysterious. It didn't make sense that she would just willingly let this guy enter her place. And Rose also lived with a roommate, someone else who was keeping a watchful eye out on her. And what's interesting, and I'm certainly not claiming that Rose Orme's roommate somehow played a part in her murder. It's just very coincidental that she'd been there most of that day with Rose, and she stepped out briefly, and within like a minute or two of stepping out, that's when apparently Claude showed up. Now, obviously, the twist could be, you know, Claude knew her roommate was there, because I think this was absolutely premeditated. I think this was I'm giving you one last shot to come back with me. Come back. And if you say no, that's it for both of us. And in that vein, what could have happened, you know, that could really wrap this whole thing up, and it's not even really that complicated of a matter, is he's waiting outside, hoping the roommate's gonna leave, and when the roommate leaves, she maybe opens and closes the door without locking it. Claude can then get to the door, throw it open, come inside with no problems. And it was noted in the aftermath, because when Claude shot himself, he fell down right in front of the door. The door had been closed and locked. It was obvious Rose was never going to escape her room there at the Lindquist. And it's, you know, I hate to laugh, I hate to find dark humor in situations such as this, because just so many cases this isn't just Portland's past, this is just America, of men obsessing over women and killing them because they wouldn't be with them. So, you know, Claude Whitsett was a piece of crap like a lot of people. Now, maybe he had mental issues that drove him to this, but I'm sorry. This guy was a scumbag, and he murdered a woman just for not wanting to be with his sketchy, stalkery ass. And it's reported in the newspaper that when the police were called to Rose's apartment, obviously in the aftermath of hearing the gunshots, that, you know, again, Whitsett he shot himself and fell right in line with the door. Police literally had to ram the door open because they had to get the door open, but they also had to like shove his body forward to get the door open. And when they came upon the scene, and it was, you know, abundantly clear, this woman had been shot by this man. The gun's lying there right next to him. Literally, even after getting the door open, Whitsett's body was still kind of sort of half out in front of the officers. They literally just kind of kicked his body aside so that they could get to Rose. And actually, when she was first found, she still was breathing, but she still expired from her wound shortly after. But I mean, I have to say, I find a little comedy in the fact that the police, when they went in, like, could just tell, like, oh, this guy did this, and they just kind of like kicked him out of the way to get to the real victim in this tragedy. But then, not to be outdone, after the police did that when they showed up, the coroner shows up a little bit later, and he's like, you did that to Mr. Whitsett's body? Well, hold my beer. When the coroner showed up, and they're obviously more trying to assess Rose Orme's body than his, the coroner literally picked his body up and like tossed it out in the hall outside of Rose Orme's room. He literally just grabbed him and dragged him out in the hallway, which that's a pretty serious disturbing of a crime scene, but I almost don't care. So, I mean, it was pretty obvious what happened. I'm all for crime scene preservation and all of that, but this is 1912, and we got a real nutcase who decided to brutally murder a woman who had done nothing wrong to anybody, even him. And so he pretty much was treated almost like an object that was in the way, and eventually tossed out in the hallway, while obviously the efforts were made to try to do what they could for Rose Orme. But obviously the way she was shot, she was not going to survive this. And there was no follow-up to be had, because Claude Whitsett killed himself too, so it was a murder-suicide, so there was no trial or anything. He took the easy way out, because he wasn't, it was abundantly clear it was premeditated. Oh, hell yeah, brother. It was obvious it was premeditated. He showed up with a gun, he locked the door, he stepped up from behind and shot her. It wasn't like there was a scuffle and the gun accidentally went off. No, it was he walked up behind and caught her off guard and then shot himself. Like, it was abundantly clear that that was the intention. Ira Keller Fountain. I don't know why we created something so beautiful in memory of a guy who was such a douchebag. But anyway, that's a story for another day. In this situation, it was just a few seconds and the whole thing was over. And the city of Portland, back in the day, experienced another case of a woman whose only crime was being independent and wanting to actually choose who to be in love with or who to be in a relationship with. And the jerk-off that couldn't handle it, apparently. And it's still not made 100% certain how serious they were together, if at all. Most newspapers said that they'd been together and then separated about a year earlier, and that's when the obsession started with Claude. And again, Rose's family said that they never really were fully together, but again, they would kind of have reason to say that, if nothing more than to try to preserve the reputation of the now deceased woman. And the attitude could be like, oh, well, Rose would never associate, someone in our family would never associate with such a seedy, frightening, troubled character. That happens a lot. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. So I'm really curious, in the end, exactly how serious this got. Probably somewhere in the middle. Between nothing at all and like full-on relationship. I think they probably saw each other a few times, wherein Rose probably saw some of the signs that, yeah, this guy's a little off. I don't know what it is, but he's a little off, and I'm gonna, cut ties here. I'm gonna pull the Band-Aid real quick and get this guy out of my life, because there's just something not quite right. And he couldn't handle that. That's kind of what I feel personally happened. It could have gone an assortment of other ways. But that, tragically, my friends, is the story of Rose Orme, murdered at the Hotel Lindquist at 2nd and Morrison back in 1912. So I'd like to thank you so much, as always, for stopping by, for supporting this series, for supporting the channel, for supporting me as I get really bright. And as always, remember to like, share, subscribe, all these different ways you can help my channel. Hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. I'm try to post there multiple times a week, various forms of different content you can only see if you sign up there. So the link to that is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Facebook, Instagram, my TikTok, and my Reddit subreddit pages. All there for you to access, peruse, do as you please. And from in front of the St. Michael the Archangel Church, which is one of the last remaining vestiges of early Italian immigrants in Portland. I just happened to stumble on that. From right in front of that, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.